Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to when you want to take a huge pile of research, articles, sources, all that stuff, and really boil it down.
Yeah, we sift through it all to find those crucial bits of knowledge, those surprising connections you might miss.
And today, wow, we are really embarking on something big. We're diving into one of the most influential texts maybe ever written, Plato's Republic.
It's foundational, absolutely.
Our goal here is to give you kind of shortcut, a way into understanding this massive work. We'll look at how Plato, mostly speaking through Socrates, his teacher, tackles these huge questions.
Questions about justice, what makes an ideal society, how citizens should be educated, even, the fundamental nature of reality and the soul itself. It's incredibly ambitious.
We're going to try and pull out the most important insights, reveal some ideas that might still feel pretty radical today, actually.
And just see why these ancient arguments still resonate, why they still push our buttons.
Right. Let's get into it. Let's unpack the Republic.
What's always struck me is how Plato, or Socrates in the dialogue, isn't just describing things as they are. He's constantly pushing, challenging the norms.
Not just the norms of his time, either. These ideas still feel provocative.
Exactly. He's building this vision of an ideal society almost from scratch. It can seem quite severe in places, definitely.
But it's all in service of answering that fundamental question. What does it mean to live a just life?
Precisely. And the starting point is maybe not what you'd expect.
No, it's surprisingly low-key. Our philosophical quest for justice begins, really, with a walk. And then a conversation unfolds. Setting the philosophical stage. The quest for justice. So the journey doesn't kick off in some grand academy. It starts with Socrates walking down to the Piraeus, the port of Athens, with Glaucon.
And they get sort of playfully stopped, detained by Polemarchus and some friends on their way back.
Which leads them back to Polemarchus's house, where his father, Cephalus, an old man, is. It feels very domestic, almost casual for what's about to unfold.
It really does. Cephalus is there, sitting comfortably. Looks like he just finished a sacrifice. He's got a garland on. He greets Socrates warmly.
And he talks about old age, finding peace in it. He says sorrows aren't about age itself, but more about a person's character, their temper.
Right. He values conversation, invites Socrates to visit more. He's clearly past the turbulent passions of youth and finds value in reflection. It sets a calm stage.
But Socrates, being Socrates, immediately throws in a little challenge, doesn't he? Subtly, of course.
Always probing. He suggests, maybe Cephalus finds old age so peaceful, partly because he's wealthy.
And Cephalus is pretty honest about it. He kind of admits, yeah, wealth helps. It doesn't guarantee peace, but it makes it easier to be just as death gets closer.
His example is very practical. Paying debts, making amends for wrongs. Wealth removes the anxiety around those things.
And that little exchange, that sets up the whole dialogue, really. What is justice?
Cephalus offers the first definition based on his own concerns. To tell the truth and pay your debts. Simple, practical, almost a businessman's view.
A common sense approach, you might say, tied to actions, obligations.
But Socrates naturally pounces on that, or rather, gently probes it.
With a classic thought experiment. Okay, he says, what if you borrowed a weapon from a friend when he was sane, but now she's gone mad? Do you give it back?
Right. Telling the truth and returning property, Cephalus's definition, would mean giving the weapon back. But that could lead to harm.
So the simple rule doesn't work in every situation. You need deeper principles, you need context.
It shows the limits of a purely rule-based morality. You can follow the rule and still do something deeply unjust or dangerous.
And that's the cue for Polemarchus, the son, to jump in. He takes over from his dad.
Yeah, he's described as having the frankness and impetuousness of youth. He's ready with what he thinks is a better answer.
His definition, justice is doing good to friends and harm to enemies, and he quotes the poet Simonides to back it up.
This sounds much more like, the real world of ancient Greece, maybe. Loyalty to your group, hostility to outsiders. It's very tribal.
A warrior's code, almost.
Yep.
Pragmatic.
But Socrates starts his dialectic. He doesn't just say you're wrong. He asks questions. How exactly does justice do good or harm?
Polemarchus says, in alliances or war. Okay. But what about peacetime? What good is justice then?
Polemarchus suggests it's good for keeping money safe.
Yeah.
When the money isn't being used.
And Socrates traps him there.
No.
So justice is useful only when the thing it's guarding is useless. That seems odd.
It's a bit of a paradox he constructs. Then comes the analogy of the arts.
Right. If an art like medicine or navigation is good at something, it's often good at its opposite too. A doctor knows health, but also disease.
So if justice is good at guarding, maybe it's also good at stealing. For the benefit of friends, of course, and harm of enemies.
He playfully suggests the just man under this definition is like Homer's Autolycus, a master thief and liar.
It forces Polemarchus into an uncomfortable corner. Then Socrates raises another problem.
Yeah.
What if you're mistaken about who your friends and enemies really are?
You might harm someone who only seems bad but is actually good, or help someone who seems like a friend but isn't.
It complicates that simple friend-enemy division. And the final hammer blow is the ethical question.
Can justice itself produce injustice? Like, can the skill of horsemanship make someone a bad horseman? It seems contradictory.
Socrates concludes that no true sage ever said the just should return evil for evil. That, he claims, is the maxim of powerful, self-serving men like tyrants.
He's dismantling these common ideas piece by piece.
And just as he seems to have cleared the ground, that's when Thrasymachus makes his entrance.
And what an entrance. Described like a savage animal, roaring. He's clearly been getting frustrated listening.
Impatient, yeah. He accuses Socrates of playing games, asking questions but never giving his own answers, knocking down everyone else's definition.
He's had enough of the polite back and forth. He's going to tell them what justice really is.
And his definition is blunt, brutal. Justice is the interest of the stronger.
Meaning
Rulers, a stronger party, make laws to benefit themselves. And justice is just the label they give to obeying those self-serving laws. Morality is just power politics.
Wow. Okay. Cynical, but maybe realistic.
Socrates immediately finds a logical flaw. What if the rulers make a mistake? What if they pass a law that isn't actually in their best interest?
Then obeying that law being just, according to Thrasymachus, would mean acting against the interest of the stronger, a contradiction.
Plato tries to patch it up, suggesting it's what the ruler thinks is their interest. But Thrasymachus brushes that aside. He's not about fine distinctions. He launches into this big speech.
Comparing Socrates to a naive child, a nursling, he says shepherds don't care for sheep out of love for the sheep. They fatten them for their own profit or for the butcher.
Exactly. He argues the just person always loses out. They're the fool. The unjust person, the clever one, always gains, especially on a large scale.
He points to tyrants. They commit huge injustices but get called gracious and blessed because they succeed.
His conclusion is devastating. Injustice, if you can get away with it, is stronger, more profitable, more advantageous than justice.
He even paints this picture. The perfectly unjust man who seems just gets all the rewards, power, wealth, marriage, even divine favor because he can offer bigger sacrifices.
While the truly just man, if he's perceived as unjust, ends up tortured and killed. It's a stark, brutal challenge.
So how does Socrates counter this? He doesn't get angry, does he?
No. He stays methodical. He insists on defining terms carefully. A true physician, qua physician, aims at the patient's good, not their own profit. A true ship captain aims at the crew's safety.
So a true ruler, qua ruler, must aim at the good of the ruled, not their own advantage.
Any benefit the ruler gets money. Honor comes from a separate art of pay, not from the art of ruling itself.
He suggests that good people only rule reluctantly, maybe out of fear of being ruled by someone worse.
Then he shifts to the function of the soul. The eye's function is seeing, the ears is hearing. What's the soul's function?
To manage, command, deliberate, basically. To live well.
And anything that performs its function well has virtue or excellence. So a soul that performs its function well is a virtuous or just soul.
And a just soul lives well, is happy. Therefore, justice is profitable in itself because it leads to a well-lived, happy life. It's about inner harmony, not just external results.
He seems to have cornered Thrasymachus, who blushes and reluctantly agrees. But the argument isn't over.
No, just when you think Socrates might have won the day, Glaucon steps up. He admires Socrates, but he's not fully convinced. He thinks Thrasymachus gave up too easily.
Glaucon wants a deeper defense of justice. He argues most people practice justice unwillingly, only because they fear punishment or social consequences.
They do it out of necessity, not because they think it's inherently good. If they could get away with injustice, they would.
He wants Socrates to prove justice is good for its own sake, like health or sight, not just for the rewards it brings.
And to illustrate this, he tells the famous story of the ring of Gyges.
Right. A shepherd finds a magical ring that makes him invisible. What does he do?
He uses it to seduce the queen, murder the king, and take over the kingdom. He acts completely unjustly because he can do so with impunity.
Glaucon's thought experiment is, imagine two such rings. Give one to a supposedly just person, one to an unjust person.
He bets they'd both end up acting the same way unjustly. taking whatever they want, harming enemies, acting like gods among men.
This, Glaucon argues, proves that people only value the appearance of justice, not justice itself. Deep down, everyone believes injustice is more profitable if you can escape detection.
He then pushes the challenge to the extreme. Compare the perfectly unjust man who masterfully appears just and gets all rewards with the perfectly just man who is seen as unjust and suffers the worst possible fate, torture, crucifixion.
Which life is truly better? Socrates has to prove that the just man, even while being tortured, is happier than the unjust man succeeding through deception.
It's an immense challenge. Prove justice is intrinsically good for the soul, regardless of any external factors.
And that huge challenge forces Socrates to change tactics. He needs a bigger canvas. 2. Constructing the ideal state. Callipolis.
So, faced with Glaucon's massive challenge, prove justice is good in itself. Socrates says, okay, let's zoom out. Justice is hard to see in one person, like small writing.
Maybe it's easier to see if we look at it writ large, in a city, in a state. Let's build an ideal state in theory and see if we can spot justice there first.
And then we can apply what we find back to the individual soul. A clever approach.
The aim of this city, Callipolis, the beautiful city, isn't to make one particular group super happy, but to achieve the greatest possible happiness and harmony for the whole state.
He uses that analogy of painting a statue. You don't paint the eyes purple just because purple is beautiful. You paint them black, or whatever color fits the whole statue makes the whole thing beautiful.
Right. Every part has to work together for the good of the whole. No single class should be excessively rich or poor, as that would disrupt the balance.
And the core principle, the absolute bedrock of this city.
Division of labor. Or, as Socrates puts it, every man doing his own business. Each person doing the one job they are naturally suited for.
This isn't just about economic efficiency for Plato, is it? It's deeper.
For him, this is justice in the state. Rulers rule, soldiers defend, producers produce, each sticking to their role, not meddling in others' tasks.
Injustice is a craftsman trying to be a soldier, or a soldier trying to rule when they're not suited for it. It's upsetting the natural order.
And to maintain this strict structure, this harmony, Plato introduces something pretty controversial. The noble lie. Or maybe magnificent myth is a better translation.
A foundational story for all citizens. What's the gist?
It's a myth claiming their upbringing and education were just a dream. In reality, they were formed inside the earth, their mother, who then sent them out. They're all siblings, born from the earth.
Okay, so that fosters unity. What else?
It also includes the idea that the god who fashioned them mixed different metals into their souls. Gold for the potential rulers, philosopher kings, silver for the auxiliaries, soldiers, and brass or iron for the farmers and craftsmen.
Ah, so it justifies the class structure, but is it rigid, born gold, always rule?
No, and this is crucial. Plato insists it's not strictly hereditary. A golden parent can have a silver child, who must then move down to the auxiliary class. A brass parent could have a golden child, who must be elevated to be trained as a ruler.
So there's social mobility based on innate aptitude, not just birth.
Exactly. And an oracle warns the city will be ruined if ever ruled by someone of brass or iron. It's about matching nature to function. Our source notes this myth is maybe aspirational for future generations.
Still, it's a lie, isn't it? Why would the philosopher promoting truth advocate for a foundational falsehood? It feels like a major contradiction.
It's one of the most debated parts. The thinking seems to be that this myth, while not literally true, serves a higher political truth. The need for unity, stability, and acceptance of one's role for the good of the whole.
It bypasses potentially divisive rational argument and instills a shared sense of identity and purpose.
Sort of. It's a way to ensure social cohesion in this perfectly ordered but perhaps fragile state. It definitely makes you think about the relationship between truth and political necessity.
Okay, so within this structure, let's look at the guardians, the ruling and auxiliary classes. Their lifestyle is unique.
Extremely so. Their role is to be watchdogs, protecting the city. And to prevent corruption, they have almost no private life or property.
No private houses, no land, barely any possessions beyond necessities, and absolutely no gold or silver.
Right. Plato argues they have a diviner metal within them, their gold or silver souls. Handling earthly gold and silver would corrupt that inner nature, breed discontent, and turn them against the very people they're supposed to protect.
They live communally, like soldiers in barracks.
Exactly. They eat together, live together. They receive their food and necessities from the producer class, like a salary paid in kind, just enough to live on.
Why such austerity?
Plato's rationale is stark. If they acquire private wealth, they'll inevitably start focusing on protecting their wealth. They'll become housekeepers and husbandmen instead of guardians, essentially becoming internal enemies or tyrants rather than allies of the people. Their loyalty must be solely to the state.
This leads us into probably the most radical part of the Republic, the proposed social reforms for the guardians regarding family and gender roles.
Yeah, this is where Plato really throws out the conventions of his time, and maybe ours too, especially regarding women.
He argues for a surprising level of equality between the sexes, doesn't he?
He does. Women, if they have the right nature, gold or silver souls, should receive the same education as men, music, gymnastics, even military training. They should share in all the duties of the state.
He anticipates people laughing at the idea of, say, naked women exercising alongside men in the gymnasium.
Right. He calls it potentially ridiculous, but dismisses the objection. Custom makes things seem normal or strange, he argues. Only what is truly harmful is rightly laughed at.
His core argument is that the relevant differences for ruling or defending the state aren't tied to sex. A woman can have the soul of a guardian just as a man can.
Nature, he says, distributes aptitudes among both sexes. Women might, on average, be weaker in some respects, but that doesn't preclude individuals from excelling. So the best women should be selected and trained as guardians alongside the best men.
That's pretty forward-thinking for ancient Greece. But then comes the family part, which is even more shocking.
The community of women and children, this is really startling. Among the guardians, there are to be no private families, no traditional marriage.
How does that work?
The rulers carefully arrange temporary marriages or mating festivals, bringing together the best men and women during their prime reproductive years. Men 25-55, women 20-40. The goal is purely eugenic, to breed the best possible offspring for the next generation of guardians.
Any other unions are forbidden.
Yes, considered impious.
Yeah.
And the children born from these state-sanctioned unions.
They're taken away from the mothers immediately, right? Raised communally.
Correct. Put in a state nursery, cared for by special officers, so parents and children don't form exclusive bonds. Mothers would breastfeed in the nursery, but without knowing specifically which child is theirs.
And what about less desirable offspring?
This is one of the harshest parts. Plato says infants born deformed or from inferior parents or outside the approved unions should be quietly disposed of in some mysterious, unknown place to keep the guardian stock pure. It's straightforward eugenics.
How do they even track kinship if no one knows their specific parents?
They use timing. All children born within a certain period after a mating festival are considered brothers and sisters. Everyone in the older generation is potentially a parent. Everyone in the younger generation is potentially a child.
The purpose of all this, it seems incredibly cold and detached.
The explicit goal is to eliminate private interest and foster total unity. If there are no private families, there's no quarreling over mine and not mine. The entire guardian class should feel like one large family, sharing joys and sorrows collectively, like a single body feeling pain in one finger.
It's for the improvement of the race, like breeding horses or dogs, which Plato explicitly compares it to.
It raises huge questions, doesn't it? His logic might be consistent within his system, aiming for maximum unity and quality, but it seems to completely ignore or suppress fundamental human emotions and attachments.
Our source material points out that historically, attempts at similar communal arrangements haven't worked well, and that Plato perhaps underestimated the complexity of human relationships, the mystery involved beyond just breeding.
It definitely shows the potential dangers of an overly rationalized approach to human society, prioritizing the abstract collective over individual bonds and affections. Aristotle, Plato's own student, would later critique this heavily.
Okay, sticking with the Guardians, what about their conduct in war? Is it as strictly regulated?
It is, but with some interesting nuances. Children destined to be guardians should be taken to observe battles from a safe position if possible.
Like apprentices learning a craft.
Exactly. To get accustomed to the sights and sounds of war, to learn by watching, there's risk involved, but Plato deems it necessary for their training.
And the rules of engagement, are they universal?
No, he makes a sharp distinction. When Greeks fight other Greeks, Hellenes versus Hellenes, it's considered discord, like a family feud. Warfare should be limited.
How so?
No enslaving fellow Greeks, no stripping the dead beyond their weapons, no burning houses or devastating farmland excessively. The aim should be reconciliation, recognizing shared Greek identity. Guilt is placed on the few leaders, not the whole population.
But when fighting non-Greeks, barbarians.
Then it's war. in the harsher, more traditional sense. The implication is that the gloves come off, the same restraints don't apply. It reflects the common Greek attitude of the time. 3. The cornerstone of the state, education for the soul.
So we have the structure of Callipolis, the ideal city. Now let's get into what Plato sees as the absolute key to making it work and keeping it stable. Education, especially for the guardians.
Absolutely. He calls education the one great matter. Get that right and the rest follows. Get it wrong and the state will inevitably decay.
The foundation is twofold, music and gymnastic. We need to unpack those terms.
Right. Music isn't just melodies, it's much broader. Literature, poetry, stories, harmony, rhythm, basically, the cultivation of the mind and spirit through the arts.
And gymnastic is about the body, physical training, health, diet. Both are essential for a balanced soul.
Starting with music, Plato is incredibly concerned about the content, especially for young children. He advocates for strict censorship.
Why such tight control?
Because young minds are like wax, highly impressionable. The stories they hear first shape their character profoundly, long before they can reason critically. So only authorized tales promoting virtue should be allowed.
And he takes aim at some pretty big names, doesn't he? Homer, Hesiod.
He does. He accused them of telling lies, and bad lies at that, about the God stories of gods fighting, scheming, deceiving, changing shape, having base desires.
Plato insists God must be perfectly good, unchanging, truthful. These traditional myths portray divinity incorrectly and should be banned.
He also wants to control how heroes are depicted. No excessive weeping or lamenting, which he sees as unmanly and weak. Guardians should be brave and self-controlled.
No showing heroes being greedy, disrespectful to gods, or cruel, like some of Achilles' actions in the Iliad. The models must be virtuous.
And this extends to the very act of imitation, mimesis. Guardians shouldn't imitate base characters or actions. Their job is to be guardians, one role, playing many parts like an actor, especially imitating women, slaves, villains, or even animal noises, is discouraged. It fragments the soul.
Simplicity, truth, harmony, those are the watchwords for the arts in Callipolis.
Because, for Plato, the rhythm and harmony of well-crafted music and stories sink deep into the innermost soul, shaping it for grace and order. It helps you recognize beauty and ugliness even before you can fully explain why.
It's about instilling a love for the good and the beautiful from the earliest age.
Exactly. Now, moving to gymnastic, the physical side, simplicity is key here too.
Guardians need to be like wakeful dogs, ready for anything, so no drunkenness.
Right. And their physical training shouldn't be the overly specialized, potentially unhealthy regimen of competitive athletes. It should promote overall health and resilience, suitable for soldiers.
Diet is important too, simple and hearty. He praises the Homeric diet roast meat.
And forbids luxuries like fancy sauces, sweets, imported delicacies. These lead to softness, ill health, and intemperance.
He connects the societal indulgence directly to the need for lots of doctors and lawyers, which he sees as a sign of a sick society.
Yeah, he finds it disgraceful when people need doctors for illnesses caused by their own laziness and bad habits, or when they take pride in legal maneuvering. He critiques a physician named Herodicus for keeping himself alive through a complex, burdensome medical routine, essentially making life itself a prolonged illness.
He prefers the approach he attributes to Asclepius, the god of healing. Treat those who can recover quickly and return to work.
But for those with fundamentally diseased bodies or souls, or those who are chronically unable to contribute, well, his view is harsh. Medicine shouldn't prolong useless lives. Let them die.
That's stark. Again, the individual's right to life seems secondary to the health and efficiency of the state. It's a perspective that clashes strongly with modern ethics.
Deeply unsettling from our viewpoint, yes. It underscores how radically different his priorities were, focused entirely on the perfection and stability of the collective, the polis. Individual suffering, if deemed unproductive, was expendable.
It's a tough aspect of Plato to grapple with.
It really is. But for Plato, this basic education in music and gymnastic, while crucial, isn't the end of the road for the true rulers. They need something more.
The longer road of philosophical training, reserved for the very best, the potential philosopher kings.
These individuals must have the right nature, intelligent and spirited, a rare combination. And they must be tested constantly throughout their lives.
Tested not just in hardship and fear, but also in pleasure and temptation, to ensure their loyalty to the state's good remains absolute.
And the ultimate goal of this incredibly rigorous, lifelong education.
To grasp the highest reality, the form or idea of the good.
This is the ultimate principle for Plato. the source of all reality, truth, and knowledge. Everyone has a sense of it, he thinks, a desire for it, even if they don't know what it is.
He explains it using that brilliant analogy of the sun.
Right. Just as the sun in our visible world provides light, allowing us to see objects, and also provides the energy for growth in life.
So the idea of the good in the intelligible world illuminates the other forms like justice, beauty, etc., allowing the mind to know them, and is also the ultimate source of their existence in reality.
It's beyond even truth and knowledge, he says. It's the cause of them. It's of inconceivable beauty, the highest thing a mind can aspire to grasp.
To visualize this journey towards the good, he gives us the image of the divided line.
Yeah, imagine a line cut into two main sections. The visible world, what we perceive with senses, and the intelligible world, what we grasp with the mind.
And each section is divided again. At the very bottom of the visible world are shadows, reflections corresponding to mere imagination or conjecture.
Then, still in the visible world, are the physical objects themselves, plants, animals, things we make. Grasping these corresponds to belief or opinion, still not true knowledge because they change.
Then we cross the line into the intelligible world. First come mathematical objects, like geometric shapes or numbers. We understand these using reason, but often relying on unexamined assumptions or hypotheses.
And finally, at the very top are the forms themselves, the pure essences, apprehended by pure reason or dialectic, which questions assumptions and ascends towards the ultimate first principle, the good itself.
It's a ladder of knowledge leading from illusion to reality.
And this entire journey, this ascent, is captured perfectly in his most famous allegory.
The allegory of the cave. This is really the heart of it.
Imagine prisoners chained in a cave since birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire. Puppeteers walk behind a screen, holding up objects, casting shadows on the wall the prisoners see.
For the prisoners, those shadows are reality. They hear echoes and think the shadows are speaking. It's all they know.
Then one prisoner is freed. Forced to turn around, see the fire, see the objects. It's painful, confusing. His eyes hurt.
Then he's dragged forcibly up a steep, rough path out of the cave into the sunlight.
At first, the sunlight is blinding. He can only look at shadows, then reflections in water, then maybe objects at night, the moon and stars.
Finally, after his eyes adjust, he can look at the sun itself, and he understands it is the source of light, seasons, everything in the visible world. This whole painful climb is the soul's journey to knowledge.
But then comes the crucial, difficult part, the return. The enlightened prisoner goes back down into the cave.
His eyes, now used to the light, can't see well in the dark anymore. He seems clumsy, foolish to the other prisoners.
He tries to tell them about the real world outside, but they think he's crazy, that the journey ruined his eyesight. They mock him.
And if he tried to free them, to drag them up to the light against their will,
They'd probably kill him, which sounds a lot like what happened to Socrates himself.
So the meaning is clear. The cave is our ordinary world of sensory experience. The shadows are illusions, opinions. The fire is like our sun.
The journey out is the difficult process of philosophical education, turning the soul away from illusion towards truth. The sun outside is the idea of the good.
Education isn't putting knowledge into an empty soul, like sight into blind eyes. It's turning the whole soul around, redirecting its existing capacity for understanding towards what is real and true.
Intelligence itself is powerful, he says, but it can be used for good or evil. Think of clever criminals. Education must also involve moral development.
And this leads to the duty of the philosopher king. The one who has seen the good must go back down.
They can't just stay in the world of contemplation. They have a duty to return to the cave, to rule, because only they truly understand reality and can guide the city towards justice. They see the shadows for what they are.
They rule out of obligation, not desire for power, and this reluctant, knowledgeable rule is the only hope for the state's salvation.
So how do potential philosopher kings prepare for this ascent? Before dialectic, they study the mathematical sciences.
Right, these are seen as a bridge, turning the mind away from the visible towards the intelligible, not just for practical use.
Arithmetic first. It forces the mind to deal with pure abstractions, with indivisible units moving beyond physical objects. It sharpens the intellect. Essential for strategy, he jokes, Agamemnon couldn't even count.
Geometry next. Again, its real value isn't surveying land, but compelling the mind to contemplate eternal, unchanging truths, the forms behind physical shapes.
Then astronomy. But not just observing stars and planets. True astronomy uses the visible heavens as a model to understand the underlying perfect mathematical harmonies and movements, which are grasped by reason, not just sight. Looking down at diagrams is better than just gazing up.
And harmonics, the sister science, not just playing instruments or judging sounds by ear. True harmonics investigates the numerical ratios and principles behind musical harmony, discovered through thought, not just listening.
All these studies are a prelude, training the mind in abstract thought, preparing it for the highest study.
Which is dialectic, the art of philosophical conversation, question and answer, rigorously examining hypotheses and seeking first principles, ultimately aiming for the good.
But Plato issues a strong warning here. Dialectic is powerful, but dangerous if misused or introduced too early.
How so?
He worries that young people exposed to rigorous questioning of fundamental beliefs about justice, honor, religion, before their character is fully formed, might just become cynical skeptics.
Like a child discovering their supposed parents aren't their real parents might lose respect for all authority.
Exactly. Without a strong moral foundation, questioning everything can lead to lawlessness, abandoning traditional values for fleeting pleasures.
It can degrade into heuristic, arguing just to win, to contradict for sport, rather than genuinely seeking truth.
So dialectic should be reserved for mature, stable minds, pursued with moderation and a real love of truth, usually after the mathematical training and practical experience. It's the capstone, not the starting point. 4. The decline of states and souls, from best to worst.
Okay, so we've built Callipolis, the ideal city, ruled by philosopher kings, grounded in rigorous education. But Plato knows perfection is fragile. He then describes how even this best state could decline.
Yes, he outlines a fascinating, almost inevitable cycle of decay through 4 progressively worse forms of government, each with a corresponding type of individual soul.
It starts with the decline from aristocracy, rule of the best, the philosophers too.
Timocracy, rule based on honor and ambition, like Sparta, perhaps?
Yeah.
This happens when the ruling class starts to neglect education, allows some mixing of metals, and the spirited warrior element becomes dominant over the rational.
Private property starts creeping back in, especially among the auxiliaries. The love of wisdom gives way to a love of honor, victory, and eventually, secretly, wealth.
The timocratic individual mirrors this. Maybe he's the son of a philosopher king who feels his father is too unworldly, gets influenced by his mother, or servants who value status and money more. He becomes ambitious, assertive, but also increasingly avaricious in private.
And this hidden love of money eventually leads to the next stage.
Oligarchy, rule by the wealthy few. Here, wealth becomes the explicit qualification for power. The state divides sharply into rich and poor.
The pursuit of money becomes all-consuming. They neglect virtue, exploit the poor, accumulate vast estates.
Plato heavily criticizes oligarchy. It violates the one-man, one-job principle, forcing people into multiple roles. It creates internal division and weakness. The rich fear, arming the poor majority.
And it produces drones, people who lose their property and become either beggars or criminals, a burden on the state resulting from the lack of proper education and the state's focus on wealth.
The oligarchic man is thrifty, hardworking, but only focused on accumulating wealth. He suppresses most desires, except the necessary ones, to save money. He's respectable on the surface, but lacks true culture or virtue.
And the tension between the rich few and the poor masses eventually boils over, leading to
Democracy, arising when the poor overthrow the oligarchs. Its defining feature for Plato is freedom, or rather, license.
everyone does as they please. Every man does what is right in his own eyes. It's diverse, colorful, like a bazaar, selling every kind of constitution and lifestyle.
Plato is quite critical of democracy's lack of guiding principles. There's no compulsion to rule or be ruled, no requirement for expertise. Offices are often filled by lot or based on popularity.
Equality is given to equals and unequals alike, ignoring differences in aptitude and virtue. It values freedom above all else, even order or wisdom.
The democratic man reflects this. Maybe his father was a thrifty oligarch. He gets a taste of unnecessary desires, the drone's honey, from bad company.
He lives for the moment, flitting between pleasures and pursuits, sometimes philosophy, sometimes business, sometimes politics, sometimes just drinking and partying. There's no order, no dominant principle in his life, just variety and freedom.
But this very excess of freedom, Plato argues, paves the way for the worst form of government.
Tyranny, the disease that kills the state. How does it emerge from democracy?
Plato argues that the insatiable desire for freedom and democracy leads to chaos and neglect of necessary order. Society becomes undisciplined children, disrespect parents, students ignore teachers, everyone resents authority.
Into this chaos steps a popular leader, a protector of the people, usually by championing the poor against the rich. The remaining drones stir this up.
This protector demands a bodyguard, supposedly for protection, then uses it to consolidate power. He eliminates rivals, stirs up wars to keep people busy and dependent on him, and purges the state of anyone brave, wise, or wealthy who might challenge him.
He becomes a full tyrant, surrounded by foreign mercenaries and freed slaves whom he trusts more than his own citizens.
The people, seeking absolute freedom, end up with absolute slavery. Plato calls it jumping out of the smoke of democracy into the fire of tyranny.
And the tyrannical man, he must be the most wretched of all.
Absolutely. His soul is ruled by a monstrous master passion, perhaps lust or ambition. He's full of unsatisfied desires, fear, paranoia.
Like a rich man who owns many slaves but is actually enslaved by his need to control them and his fear of them.
Exactly. He lives like a prisoner in his own palace,
Like
women, afraid to go out, envious of ordinary citizens. His soul is in utter chaos, the worst parts dominating the best. He can't do what he truly wants because he's driven by base appetites.
He is the least free, the poorest, and the most miserable of all individuals, just as the tyrannical state is the most wretched of all states. The supremacy of justice and the immortal soul. Okay, so after that grim tour through the decaying states and souls, Socrates finally circles back to Glaucon's original challenge, proving that justice is inherently better, more profitable, more conducive to happiness than injustice, regardless of external rewards.
Right. He needs to show that the just soul, even if suffering externally, is fundamentally happier than the successful tyrant. And he starts by looking more closely at desires within the soul.
He distinguishes between different kinds. There are necessary desires: food, drink, shelter needed for survival.
Then unnecessary desires for luxuries, excessive pleasures which can be trained away, and finally unlawful desires, dark, wild impulses that surface in dreams when reason sleeps, things like incest or murder.
The tyrannical man is completely enslaved to these unlawful desires, or at least the unnecessary ones, driven wild. The just man keeps them under control through reason.
Building on this, Socrates revisits the three parts of the soul, reason, spirit, and appetite, and argues each has its own corresponding type of pleasure.
The pleasure of learning and knowing truth, reason. The pleasure of honor and victory, spirit. And the pleasures of money-making and physical gratification, appetite.
Each type of person, philosopher, honor lover, money lover, thinks their own pleasure is the best. But who is the best judge?
The philosopher, Socrates argues, because only the philosopher has experienced all three types of pleasure to some degree, but crucially has fully experienced the highest pleasure, the pleasure of understanding truth.
The others haven't truly tasted the philosopher's pleasure, so their judgment is limited. The philosopher's experience is broadest, and their instrument of judgment, reason, is the best.
Therefore, the life of reason, the philosophical life, is judged to be the most pleasant, the happiest. The life of honor comes second, and the life of gain last.
He also argues that the pleasures of reason are the only truly pure and stable pleasures. Many other pleasures are just reliefs from pain or illusions, mixed with suffering.
Which leads to that astonishing calculation about the tyrant's misery.
Yes, the 729 times calculation. It's more symbolic than literal, of course. He places the king, philosopher at one end, the tyrant at the other, with the oligarch and democrat in between.
He measures the distance between them. King to oligarch is one step of three. Aristocracy, democracy, oligarchy. Oligarch to tyrant is another step of three. Oligarchy, democracy, tyranny.
So the tyrant is third from the oligarch, who is third from the king. He takes this thrice-removed idea and squared it, 3 by 3, 9, then cubes that, 9 by 9 by 9 by 729. The king is 729 times happier than the tyrant.
It's a dramatic way to say the gulf in happiness is almost unimaginably vast. And he connects 729 to the number of days and nights in a year, grounding this abstract number in human life.
It reinforces the idea that the just life, ruled by reason, is vastly superior in terms of genuine, lasting happiness.
To make this even clearer, he offers that amazing image of the soul as a composite creature.
Right. Imagine inside each person, there's a many-headed beast, appetites, some tame, some wild, a lion, spirit, passion, and a little man, reason.
The unjust person feeds the beast and the lion, letting them run wild and fight each other while starving and dragging the man along. Internal chaos.
The just person makes the inner man the master. He befriends the lion, using spirit to help control the beast, nurturing the tame heads and weeding out the wild ones. He brings all three parts into harmony, ruled by reason.
So justice is profitable because it creates inner unity, self-mastery, psychic health. Injustice creates internal war and slavery.
And this internal state, Plato argues, is what truly matters, leading him to his final arguments about the soul's immortality.
He needs to show justice pays off, not just in this life, but eternally. How does he argue the soul is immortal?
His argument is that everything is destroyed by its own specific evil or disease, wood by rot, iron by rust, the body by illness.
What's the specific evil of the soul?
Injustice, ignorance, cowardice, intemperance. But Plato observes, these vices, however bad, don't actually destroy the soul. They don't make it cease to exist. An unjust person can live a long time.
So if the soul's own peculiar evil doesn't destroy it, surely no external evil, like bodily death, can destroy it either. Therefore, the soul must be immortal.
To see the soul's true nature, he says, we need to look beyond its current state, encrusted with earthly experiences and vices, like the sea god Glaucus covered in shells and weeds. In its pure state, aligned with reason, it's divine.
And the rewards for the just soul. The gods know and love the just, he claims. Even if they suffer in this life, they ultimately receive rewards, both here and hereafter. Honesty is the best policy, ultimately. Clever rogues might succeed for a while, but they usually fail in the end.
Punishment, too, serves a purpose, helping to tame the beast within and perfect the soul.
This culminates in the final story of the dialogue, the myth of a vision of the afterlife and cosmic justice.
Is a soldier who dies, goes to the afterlife, and comes back to report what he saw. He describes souls being judged, spending time in reward or punishment, and then coming to choose their next life.
They gather before the fates, Lachesis past, Clotho present, Atropos future, beneath a pillar of light holding the cosmos together.
A prophet announces the crucial moment. Souls will choose their next life pattern. Virtue is free. The responsibility is with the chooser. God is blameless.
This is huge. Destiny isn't entirely fixed. We choose our path, based on the wisdom or lack thereof we've gained.
They're presented with samples of all kinds of lives, human and animal, famous and obscure, tyrannical and humble. The choice is critical.
Plato stresses that the most important knowledge is how to choose the good life, how to weigh factors like wealth, poverty, beauty, power, and see how they affect virtue.
Recounts seeing the first soul to choose snatch at the life of a great tyrant, tempted by his power, only to realize later it included horrors like devouring his own children. He chose foolishly, without reflection.
Others choose more wisely, sometimes based on their previous life's experience. Odysseus, tired of ambition, chooses the quiet life of a private citizen.
The key lesson. We need to carry an adamantine faith in truth and right with us always. Avoid extremes, choose the mean, the balanced life, guided by understanding. That's the path to happiness, both here and hereafter. Education is vital for making that wise choice. 6. Plato's stance on poetry and imitation and its nuances.
So, after that epic journey through justice, politics, psychology, and cosmology, Plato returns near the end to a topic he touched on earlier, poetry. And his conclusions are, well, pretty severe.
Extremely severe. He essentially advocates for the banishment of most forms of poetry, especially dramatic poetry, from the ideal state. He says all poetry is an outrage on the understanding, unless you have the balm of knowledge to protect yourself.
Even Homer, whom he clearly admires deeply.
Even Homer. He says he loves Homer, but loves truth more. It's a philosophical judgment, not just aesthetic.
Why such hostility? It stems from his theory of imitation, or mimesis, right?
Exactly. Remember the levels of reality. The true form, made by God, the idea of a bed, the physical object made by a craftsman, by a carpenter's bed, and the imitation made by an artist, a painting of a bed.
The painting is third removed from reality, just an imitation of an appearance.
And Plato argues the poet, especially the tragic poet, is just like the painter. An imitator, dealing in appearances thrice removed from truth.
Poets can describe skills like warfare or chariot driving, but they don't possess the actual knowledge. The user knows best, the maker second best. The imitator knows hardly anything about whether the imitation is good or bad.
They imitate how things look or sound, appealing to emotion and sensation, not reason or reality. If someone could actually do the great deeds poets describe, Plato asks, would they do them rather than just talk about them?
So lack of true knowledge is one charge. What else? What are the harmful effects?
A major concern is poetry's effect on emotions. It encourages us to indulge in feelings we'd normally suppress.
Like when we watch a tragic hero lamenting on stage, we feel sympathy. We praise the poet for stirring our emotions.
But in our own lives, Plato argues, we try to bear misfortune with dignity and restraint, seeing excessive grief as unmanly. Poetry nourishes this irrational, emotional part of the soul, making us weaker and less self-controlled in real life. Same goes for comedy, encouraging buffoonery.
It strengthens the lower parts of the soul at the expense of reason.
And he also sees poets as potential allies of tyrants, flattering them, promoting harmful ideas, and undermining respect for law and tradition for popular appeal. He thought contemporary poets were corrupting the art form.
It still seems strange, though. Plato himself is such a master artist. His dialogues are works of literature. Why ban the poets?
It's a puzzle. Our source suggests it might be partly historical context. Perhaps poetry was in decline in his time, replaced by shallow spectacle, a theatrocracy. Maybe he saw it contributing to Athens' problems.
And there's that fundamental ancient quarrel between philosophy and poetry. Philosophy aims at unchanging truth and reason. Poetry deals in images, emotions, particulars.
For Plato, poetry was too closely allied with the senses and passions, the lower parts of the divided line in the cave. Philosophy was the path to true knowledge. Poets, like sophists, dealt in persuasion and appearance, not reality.
Even if poetry gives pleasure, Plato's severe conception of truth demanded more. Did it make citizens better? He wasn't convinced. He felt the philosopher's grasp of forms was superior.
Ultimately, while acknowledging poetry's charm, he concludes that for the health of the ideal state and the rational soul, its seductive power must be strictly controlled or even excluded. Truth and reason must prevail over emotional imitation.
And there you have it, a truly deep dive into some of Plato's most profound and, let's face it, challenging ideas from the Republic. From defining justice, building that radical ideal society, the philosopher's ascent, the city's decay, right through to kicking out the poets, it's an incredible scope.
It really is.
Yeah.
And what's so striking is how relevant so many of these debates still feel. Individual virtue versus societal needs, the purpose of education, the dangers of absolute freedom or absolute power, the nature of reality itself.
Plato's vision is definitely extreme in parts, maybe utopian, maybe even dystopian, depending on your view of things like eugenics or censorship. But it forces you to think, to question your own assumptions about how we should live together.
He doesn't give easy answers for today, but he frames the essential questions in such a powerful way.
Absolutely. So for you, our listener, maybe the takeaway is this. If that myth of Ur is right, and the responsibility for choosing our life truly lies with us, how seriously do we take our own education in discerning good from evil? How consciously do we make choices that shape our soul?
Are we aiming for that internal harmony that makes us maybe not 729 times happier, but fundamentally more whole than a life ruled by unchecked desire and illusion?
It's a lot to think about, maybe something to mull over or even deep dive into further on your own. Until next time, keep thinking.